for more kind of leisure opportunities. So it was a big disappointment professionally and personally not to be able to come. But I'm pleased to say we've got 3 of our commissioners on the call with us at the moment: Tom Shields, Mike Danson, and Norrie Kerr, and also Gregor Auld, who's with the Secretariat in Edinburgh. So just to get us started, I mean, the phrase just transition is not that well known to people, and we understand that, and we are trying to sort of translate it a bit. So just to say what the Commission was actually set up to do, we actually started at the end, or at the beginning of 2019, and there was a bit of a prehistory because, in fact, Scottish Friends of the Earth and the Scottish Trade Union Congress had been running a so-called Just Transition Partnership earlier than that for several years, and they persuaded the Scottish Government to set up this commission, which several of us are members of. And the job is basically to advise Scottish ministers on how we make the way to net zero by 2045. And I should say, we're not to quarrel with that target. We're about how we get there in ways that maximise the economic and social opportunities. It builds on Scotland's existing strengths and assets, and so that we understand and can manage the risks in terms of regional cohesion, equalities, poverty, including fuel poverty, and in terms of the labour market. And the remit we have is to provide practical, realistic, affordable recommendations, which are all of the kind of things that ministers really look for. They want things they can do on a Monday morning rather than very high level sort of philosophical recommendations. We've got 12 commissioners in all, and 4 of them are now on the call. We've just been joined by Richard Hardy. And they come from a range of backgrounds: trade unions, environmental NGOs, academia, and people from a range of different sectors that as part of industry. So it's a very wide range of people. And just to emphasize, at least so far, we've actually managed to do everything in a consensual way, agree with all our recommendations, in spite of the fact that people have come from different backgrounds. Now, one point to make is that in many countries, the concept of just transition has been used, but it's been used quite narrowly to reflect countries in which there have been big transitions out of the coal industry. Now, for Scotland, coal is effectively in the rear view mirror because we closed Lungannet Power Station back in 2016. But in many parts of Europe, like Asturias in Spain, Silesia in Poland, the Ruhr part in Germany, it's essentially about getting out of coal. But because Scotland has done that already, we have actually taken a much broader approach to just transition. So employment and skills and how they're managed in the transition is absolutely critical, but we need a wider perspective. So we took a very early decision to think about the role of consumers as well as producers and communities and bring into the thinking, because they'll all be absolutely critical in terms of the move to net zero. Now, since the beginning of 2019, we have been around the country scoping out many of the issues relating to the just transition. And the zoom spread across this slide isn't because we zoomed around Scotland. It's because after we went into lockdown, we very much took to Zoom, as we are tonight, to try and have links with people. But what we were very keen to talk to a very wide range of people about it and get closer. We didn't stick to meetings in Edinburgh all the time. So just to illustrate it, top left-hand corner, that shows us meeting at the Coalfields Regeneration Trust in Kincardine, where we took a backwards look about the transition out of coal with the closure of the Lungannet Power Station, and thought about the electricity industry and renewables. So talking to community groups and trade unions there. In the centre, at the bottom of the slide, that's us at the Oil and Gas Technology Centre in Aberdeen, where we were looking at the transition of the regional economy in the northeast and how closely that was linked to the oil and gas sector. And what the picture shows is us having an evening engagement session with younger people from the Energy Institute's Young Professionals Network, people who are at their earliest stages of their career in the energy industry and thinking about the aspirations that they had for working there. And again, we followed up that meeting with subsequent meetings with trade union officers, etc. Bottom left-hand corner, we went to the borders to look at transitions in the agricultural sector. And one part of it was putting our Wellington boots and trudging through the cow sheds to look at how sustainable beef production worked in that part of the country. It was getting dark by the time we did it. So again, this was the evening meeting that we had with local farmers in Melrose, talking about some of the problems of transition in the agricultural sector. Top right-hand corner, this isn't a picture of the Grangemouth refinery and petrochemical complex. It's obviously our tourist trip to the Kelpies afterwards, but we did visit Grangemouth to look at the challenges for heavy industry in Scotland, particularly with the Grangemouth complex there, where we were helped out by people who worked at the site. And we have continued that with lots of Zoom meetings on different themes and different topics like education and skills, training, etc. And what we had hoped to be able to do to Orkney was to have a visit like these that focused on the theme of innovation. And we obviously did that with EMEC being based in Orkney and some of the innovative things that have been done in the islands because through the use of renewables, hydrogen, etc., which we're really, really interested in. So in terms of the output, we have actually produced 2 outputs so far, and our thinking on just transition and how we can do something that's fair for people has developed a lot. We produced an interim report at the request of the ministers back in February. And it highlighted 3 main themes. One was the need for fairness to be at the heart of all the decisions taken on climate change, because lots of difficult decisions will need to be taken as we move towards net zero by 2045. A second one was that we need people's voices to be heard when the transition to net zero is underway. This cannot be a top-down exercise. It absolutely needs engagement. And finally, that transition planning, including planning at the sectoral level, needs to become embedded just in about every sector. And these themes, we've picked up these 3 themes up in the discussions we've had with people subsequently, with all sorts, people who work in the oil and gas industry, farmers, local communities, business people, and trade unions. Now, the other thing to flag is that when we got to about Easter this year, and as we went into lockdown, we got a request from Rosanna Cunningham, the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform, to produce advice for a green recovery from the COVID crisis. And that's not talking about the immediate challenge of the few months. It was thinking a couple of years ahead. How do you get the economy to pick up in a way that's compatible with long-term climate goals, but also addresses some of the equity challenges that we're facing at the moment? Because clearly COVID has exacerbated inequalities, never mind taking us in the right direction. So we've thought in this about many aspects of it. We thought about the role that warmer homes have to play, better public transport, investment in jobs and renewables. And we hope that these are the kind of topics that come up in discussions today. Now, just to say, we got a lot of coverage from the reports that we've produced already, and you can see it from the headlines. Some of them from the BBC News website, where there's been a lot of interest from correspondents on what we're up to. And I might say, with my international role, there's a lot of interest in what Scotland is doing internationally. And I think that can play a lot and help our reputation when we get to the Glasgow Conference of the Parties that's going to take place next year. Now, just to say, that's how we got to where we are at the moment. And just one slide that shows why we were interested in coming to Orkney, which we've managed to do virtually, if not physically. The kind of things that are relevant to the just transition debate. We know that a big part of ending our contribution to climate change in Scotland is going to come from technological solutions that will help us reduce emissions. So things like production and use of hydrogen, developing carbon capture and storage, more renewables, and managing a more flexible and responsive electricity grid. They're all part of the picture. We'll need more of that, but so these are some of the kind of things we'll need. The question that we need to ask as a commission, because we're not so much concerned about the level of ambition as how we achieve that ambition, is how this technological change and innovation could work in the interests of people around the country to help us deliver a fair, just transition to net zero. And there are a number of issues that are going to come from this. So, you know, marine energy is a place where Orkney is leading the way. So how do we take this expertise and make sure that it delivers job opportunities as the industry develops? We've heard much about how some of the aspirations in the renewable sector, and we're particularly thinking about offshore wind, have not come to be realised, and what might be done about that. And my colleague Richard Hardy from the Commission, you know, from the Prospect Union, might actually want to offer a few thoughts on that as well. Just to say, on the consumer side of it, there's also lots of innovation happening in the energy system, and the big question that we've identified is how these costs and benefits are going to be fairly distributed between different kinds of consumers. So Orkney is a very interesting case here. There's a lot of innovative projects happening, but at the same time, there's some of the highest rates of fuel poverty in Scotland. It shouldn't be the case. So we need to think about the kind of things. And again, that's the kind of things we'd be looking for your advice on. So I'll finish off at this point, but I just wanted to reflect on one quote from our interim report that we published earlier this year. And this was a sentence that in draft was crafted by Gregor Auld from the Secretariat, who's on the call. It was buried in a way in sort of page 12 of the draft report, but all of the commissioners thought it captured so perfectly what we were trying to do that we've kind of elevated it to our strapline for what we are doing to achieve. And it captures all the main points. We're trying to get a just transition so that governments design policies in a way that we ensure the benefits of climate change action are shared widely and the costs don't fall unfairly on those who are not able to pay, whose livelihoods are directly at risk as the economy changes, because the economy surely will need to change if we're going to go net zero by 2045. So I'll finish off at that point. We've got 4 other commissioners on the call. I mean, I'm not chairing the meeting. I'll pass it back to Evelyn, but they also might have some interesting thoughts there. But just to emphasize, we're really interested in listening to you and your views on some of the questions that are coming up, because we are very much in listening mode when we come to this. So Evelyn, at that point, I'll shut it down and pass back to you to chair the session.